All right. So this last session is not going to be me doing a whole lot of talking if everything works out according to plan. It's going to be you guys doing a lot of talking. And maybe I'll help guide it along a little bit. So we've heard some very interesting stuff from the folks working on registries. And what we want to do now is pop up a level and ask all of you, our technology friends and partners, about our strategy for Copyright 2.0, Registries 2.0. What should be the goal of this kind of technology? And there are 4 questions that I've prepared. Let's see here. The first question is, what do we not Creative Commons, we as a people, need out of Copyright 2.0, Registry 2.0? So think about users and publishers. What are we looking for in terms of features? The answer could be nothing, I'm perfectly happy with the state of the web, or it could be quite a drastic set of tools and questions we'd like some kind of system to answer for us. And then what are the collaborative technology efforts, rather, that are needed to get this to come about? So lots of startups are going to happen. Lots of startups are going to build technologies around this kind of stuff. But what are the collaborative efforts that would really push this along? And then here's one very important question. What role should Creative Commons not play in this? Right? A lot of people have asked us to do various things in this realm, but the first question we have to address is, where do we just stand back and just not even try to do anything because either the startups in the market will take care of it or it's not our place? What are the things we shouldn't do? And then is there any role that maybe we should play in this process? And this is really meant as an open-ended set of questions to get your feedback, get your thoughts. We have no answers to these questions. So why don't we start with the first one? So what we have is mics that are going around. You don't have to get up. I think we do, right? Yes. So just raise your hand and our fantastic interns will bring you a mic and you can say what you want. Or you can scream it if you can scream loud enough. What do we need out of Copyright 2.0, Registry 2.0? Pick a side. Maybe you're a publisher or you're a user. From that point of view, what do you want?
Definition.
Sorry, where?
Hey.
Yeah.
Fred from Creative Commons. But I'm curious what people's opinions of Copyright 2.0 would be. I mean, I think Creative Commons is kind of an obvious example, maybe. Maybe not. I don't know.
So you're saying Creative Commons is Copyright 2.0? Okay, yeah. Is Creative Commons enough? Do we need more?
This is Gunnar from Adobe. So I've been thinking about this stuff for a while, and I think what's the missing ingredient for Copyright 2.0 is I think trust. And we were just having this discussion that it's really important that the relationship, I think when I step back and look and see what we're trying to do here is you have basically somebody who's offering up content and somebody who wants to use the content. It could be buyer, it could be seller if it's a commercial thing. But essentially you're establishing a relationship between these two people through the media and through the license and the infrastructure. And when I listen to all these panelists today, I think trust was mentioned once or twice, but I think fundamentally getting to enabling that level of trust is going to be really important. And I don't know if that's going to be a technical solution or not. I think there's going to be aspects of it which will be technical, but I think what's fundamentally needed is going to be just an education of people in general about copyright. And I know that Creative Commons, that's what you guys have been trying to do, and I think just keeping along that path is going to be really useful.
Quick question before we continue, Mike. Are we writing this? Are we logging all this? Not you specifically, but that's the one thing I forgot to check.
We have inserts live logging it. So.
Yeah, but I recruited 2 of them already, so I want to make sure that there's. Is anybody writing notes, taking notes on this? You're on it? Okay, great. Awesome. Awesome. So trust. Trust is one of the things you mentioned. Trust, I'll say one thing and you don't have to, you can answer or we can move on. Trust of what? You mean trust of that this is really licensed under the license it is, or trust of what kind? Yeah.
So the feedback I get when I talk to people on the commercial side, right, who are wanting to use images, right, for like, an advertiser. It's like, great, I want to go to Flickr and get, the latest cool images that people are posting and use that in my advertising campaign. And then, the business side comes in and says, whoa, no, we can't do any of that because we can't trust where those images have come from, right? Even if it is Creative Commons, even then it's like, no, we don't know. Are there model releases? I don't know, right? And so they end up going to these ecosystems of trusts that have been already established, like Getty Images, right? Everything you pull out of Getty Images is trusted because they've gone through that due diligence, right? And you have to pay for that, right? So if we're looking to make things more webby, that's great, but I think you're going to also have to then address the trust issue in a webby context. And I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know what that will mean. Is there technology to do that? I don't know. Is it social networks that can be used to play a role in there potentially? So I just see that as a need.
Okay, so trusting the sourcing of the content, the licensing of the content and such. Yeah, for the use. Michael.
Yeah, I'd like to say the same thing a different way, which is I think what we need a much stronger concept of safe harbor around actions. And I have blogged a lot about the dichotomy between the industrial model. The model I'm using is Michael Pollan's Omnivore Dilemma, where he talks about the industrial model of breaking everything down into its finite elements versus the sustainable model, where there really is a holistic thing, and soil is more than the component than the sum of all the fertilizers and chemicals and other things. And this element of trust is potentially a way of building it up in the industrial model, piece by piece. What is the right? What is the use? What is the context? Let's get two lawyers and argue about it. Safe harbor is a concept that basically says, you know what? There is an actual community norm that is acceptable enough so that all of society can look at actors within that safe harbor and basically say, you know what? Bringing lawyers into this situation is just not going to be productive. And I believe that we will fail if we try and reduce our efforts to fit the industrial model, even if that is the premise of the whole legal system. And we will succeed if we cast it in a community context where this safe harbor and other organic processes have strength, even when the individual rights themselves cannot be properly described or delineated.
So are you linking this back to sort of the original permission by default idea that Creative Commons pitched at the beginning? So you have some permissions by default?
Not only that, but I think that in the same way that Larry Lessig put on a call on his blog to go and argue against the Sean Bentley Orphan Works Act of 2008, which is yet another example of trying to reduce everything down to an industrial element and then stick it in some government-controlled registry. What I think we need, when you asked about Copyright 2.0, because we haven't gotten to the Creative Commons part yet, I think we need to be pushing the agenda that there are things that people can expect to be able to do without being pulled into a system. And if they can demonstrate that they're doing it in some definition of good faith reasonably well, there's just no money to be made in chasing them down around the small parts.
Okay.
Thank you.
We can clap. That's good. There was a question back there.
I think the question is somewhat similar to the question. I'm coming to this forum as a pure user of Creative Commons licensing as a tool that protects me as a webmaster from any lawsuits that can arise from the fact that people for whom we're building websites are uploading their content. So for me, I'm looking at this as a kind of one-stop source of getting both explanation of what users need to say, okay, I allow people, to use it in this way or that way, and kind of some legal protection. And this applies not only to music, but also once we're moving towards scientific things like science commons is of huge interest, what is the patenting issues? What are scientific implications? Publishing of scientific articles. These are my questions.
Yes. And then one quick thing, if you can say your name before you start. I forget, what was your name? Irina. So for people taking notes, yeah.
Hi, I'm Hanno Kaiser. I'm an attorney. I think that clearly we should, for Copyright 2.0, we really should strive to reorient the copyright system to what its original design really was, to incentivize people to create more. But we have to take into account that the means of production of creative works have just changed dramatically. And so we're dealing with the situation where currently we're just mortgaging the future dramatically in order to, realize some short terms in the present. And I think for a Web 2.0 or for a Copyright 2.0, that just ought to be different. So the default should be different. We should go back, I think, to an opt-in system. We should go back to we should create a copyright system that has much shorter terms. We should have a copyright system that clearly exempts derivative works. Because I think, personally, I'm a blogger and I'm an academic too, so I take so much from others that the non-derivative, in a sense, as a legal prohibition is just so extremely anachronistic that I think that should be the default rule, should be that all derivatives are permitted. And I think in terms of the safe harbor, we should really move to something like a non-commercial safe harbor, as long as it's non-commercial in a relatively broadly defined sense. It's fine. Just a little footnote about the Creative Commons thing, that one of my issues with Creative Commons is that when I give away my stuff on Creative Commons, I usually say, well, it's fine for non-commercial use. But then I add this long description on my website, what I consider non-commercial use, because it's really difficult to say what that is. And essentially it is, if you want to print 5,000 or more copies of something and make a lot of money, then that's what I consider commercial. But it's still non-commercial to me if you show up at a conference, use my stuff, and you get paid for it or something. And I think this will be a very difficult line for us to draw in Copyright 2.0, a materiality threshold for commercial use. And I think it ought to be relatively high.
That's very interesting. So some safe harbor for non-commercial, but some difficulty at defining exactly what non-commercial is. Yeah, please.
There's actually a bill on the Japanese floor, which is similar to what you're saying, which is that all non-commercial use should be permitted on the internet without asking for permission, and all commercial use should use the Creative Commons non-commercial license that requires a certain royalty to be paid to the licensor. There are a couple of problems with it, but it's interestingly, it's the former head of the Motion Picture Association of Japan who read all of Larry's books and got converted and decided to champion this bill. Obviously, we have a lot of resistance, but they're trying to actually jump past DMCA, because in Japan we don't have fair use, so we can't. So YouTube, for instance, has a lot of trouble in Japan because of that. And so instead of allowing this kind of notice and takedown, they're trying to leapfrog that into a kind of Copyright 2.0 that does exactly what you're trying to do.
Okay, great, thanks. I'm going to go this side of the room, and I'll be back. Great, yeah.
Well, just
mention your name quickly.
Yeah. Just, Brian Bibber from Wikimedia. A slight danger about being really lax in the non-commercial space is that when one of those things then wants to move a little bit into the commercial world, you don't have sort of the paper trail of where to go to find out who to get permission from. And at Wikipedia, we're using a sort of open sourcey share-alike license, which of course allows commercial use. And that includes things like, say, printing an article into a book and then publishing it. For, say, people who don't have online access or just for the convenience of it. So, especially with all these open source licenses that very explicitly do not exclude commercial use, having a split between the non-commercial world and the commercial world means that then you end up with no real way to bridge them. And I just think that's a little freaky.
Yeah, more on the, definitely lots on the commercial, non-commercial split. Mike, I think you're next. If I'm missing you, raise your hand higher, and I'll try not to miss you. See if we can take a slant towards the Registry 2.0 technologies, if at all. If not, let's keep going.
Well, so Mike Carroll, I'm on the board of Creative Commons. I want to suggest there's actually a lot of demand in the commercial sector for this kind of registry, just to facilitate transactions, because even in the U.S. copyright database is pretty useless for a lot of this. So. But I worry about the project then getting skewed by those interests. So you could say, what's the purpose of the registry if we're doing design implementation? It could be facilitate transactions, so make sure there's enough data to sort of contact information and other things, and maybe some kind of liability prevention. But I suggest that that's too limited a version. One of the things we learned with the Creative Commons license is that there are a set of interests out there that are not captured always by the law. So attribution, right, is not required under copyright law, but lots of people want attribution. So if an organization like CC is going to take on this project, we ought to be sort of pushing our vision of what this is. And rather than being a map, a property map, I would suggest if thinking of this as a creativity map, right? And wanting to create an interface that's cheap and easy for people to use so that they can register their creativity, even if they're not doing it for the purposes of entering into commercial transactions or to limit somebody's liability, but just to be noticed. I created this and this is who I am, right? And I want to get recognized for that. So I would, some form of recognition, publicity function in the interface would help to reorient this into a creativity map rather than a property map.
So feeding into the ego aspect of open source in some sense, yeah. Any other?
Hi, Mark Graham from OER Commons. Yeah, a couple things. This may seem obvious, but a wider spread use and adoption through greater visibility. And I think approaching this at a couple of levels. One would be at the tool level, where we work more closely with a number of common tools, not just the edge cases. I mean, yes, the Drupals and the Plones, the Django's and all the rest of that. That seems obvious, but more like the vignettes and the interwovens, and the other kind of systems that people are using out there to create content, so that marking something up with an appropriate license is simply pressing a button. I was at a conference last week up in the city about the Moodle, which is the most popular open source learning management system software. And there's more than 40,000 installs of Moodle, but there's nothing in the Moodle user interface or metadata, for example, about Creative Commons. So, unless these things are very simple to use, people aren't going to use them. And then the second one is that more at the institutional level. So going after the major publishers and demonstrate some cases in which materials are in fact marked with Creative Commons. I just noticed, for example, that the Norwich Bulletin, it's a newspaper in Eastern Connecticut, is published under the Creative Commons license. For people in Eastern Connecticut, that's probably the only way they've ever heard of the Creative Commons, is on the bottom of the local newspaper. So, finding those strategic ways that you can get this meme, this idea out there to a larger audience that's outside of Silicon Valley.
Okay. Since I don't see any other hands up, I think, and the time is right. No, there's another hand. Okay. Yeah, sorry. And then after this, we'll transition to question number 2.
I mean, just to follow up on that last comment, I think it's wonderful that there's a lot of talk here about how to build these systems. But as we've seen with people using Flickr licensed content without some education around the technology, which I think, as a community, we're not doing terribly well at. We've got a lot of issues here, and I think tying ourselves too closely to particular technologies and particular user models when our user base, are the base of people who use Creative Commons licenses is inevitably going to change over time. Tying too close to who we have right now as consumers and producers of CC licensed content is potentially problematic and something to keep in mind.
So that's the second vote for education of the user base, which seems to be something that a lot of people believe is important, right? Yeah. All right. Well, are we transitioning, or is it going to be in between? Here, I'll change the slide, but you can say whatever you want. Everybody else will be inspired to think of the next question.
Okay. This was actually on the registry. Brian Rowe, legal intern at Creative Commons, although it does apply to this some when we look at different technologies. And I think it's important that as many different organizations and different groups try to tackle this problem, that standards come up again and again, because as someone who may need to clear rights on things, being able to use a central tool to go to each of those different registries is much easier if there's some standardization between the information that's kept, how it's kept, and then how it's pulled out later. I think it's great to have many different registries working on those, but if those registries can work together in some way to create some standards around that information, it would be more beneficial long term.
So this is great transition. Talking about standards is one of the possible technical efforts that's needed here. I want to bring a couple of things together from the previous question and this one. If we have these registries, and you're saying there's got to be many of them, maybe that's everybody agrees with that. Maybe some people think, no, actually we need one big one. I don't know. But if we have these registries, are they playing the role of trust to sort of, so that I can trust that this is an image I can actually use for commercial purposes? Are they playing the role of the opt-in system, where they're just a way to say, well, if you're not in one of those registries, you really don't have any rights at all on this content, to make it a little extreme? What's the role, and also in what you're saying here about the standards, what should those standards allow? So you just said they should allow you to just search all the registries at once, for example. Are there anything else that standards might be useful for here, or that any other technical effort might be useful for? Did I just crush everybody with that long statement? I think I crushed it. Did I need to bring the puppy back? No? Okay. Over there. We got a mic coming to you.
So my name is Eric Kanza. I'm with UC Berkeley. I'm just wondering also about how some of this fits in with larger sort of ecosystem of the web, and where this might work with, say, people would be concerned about search engine rankings and things like that, and how we could use registries like this if people are providing free content that's available, it's being attributed a lot. How can that feed back to those individuals so that they can get some exposure on some of their own web assets that they might want to be able to promote by through the use of these free content? And how does that fit with this concept of a registry? Or is everything going to be pointing right back to that registry, and then the registry becomes like this big magnet for all the Google searches? So it's a sort of a wonder. I'm just wondering about how all that works together.
Yeah, I have no answers. I mean, these are good questions. Yeah, please.
Hi. Okay. Yeah, Ashish Laraya. Yeah, I've talked. Okay. So basically, I don't think that a central registry is antithetical to attribution links to people's individual web pages. You can imagine. I think it's possible to imagine. Well, maybe. If you can imagine a website listing every copyrighted work, if you can imagine that much, then it's not too much of a stretch to have that website list what URL the person wants to be attributed with and what name the person wants to be attributed with. And then when you use the work, you don't necessarily have to link to that. You can link to them as they want to be attributed.
So that could be one of the incentives for people to work with the registry also, to really make that, spell that out pretty clear. Done.
Yeah, consistent attribution could be an incentive to work with the registry.
Okay, let me push a little bit here, especially on the folks who are building registries. Is there, do you have a model? Let me ask a simpler question. Do you need standards? Is there a need for a standard in the way you respond to queries, in the way you represent data? I heard some mentions that you had to come up with your own XML model because you didn't find the right one. Other folks are using. Is there a need for the registries to come together and think about what a standard API might be, what a standard data format might be? Is it?
I mean, what I like about RDF and RDFA facilities is that it's really
Yeah, what I like about the RDF approach and the CCRL approach is that it really depends on the incorporation of these external vocabularies. I mean, it seems like we don't have a lot of consensus anywhere in the metadata world except on 7 elements in Dublin Core, and even those are subject to debate. So I think, what's nice about the RDFA standard is that it creates the possibility of a framework to sort of allow the evolution of those sort of namespaces to take place, and people will use what's useful, and eventually we'll wind up with some consensus, hopefully.
Any other registry folks want to comment? No? On standards or yeah, right there. Great.
Yeah, we've been Registered Commons, Joe Benzo. We've been aware of the possibility or the need to possibly create standards, especially as we aren't the only registry service in the field, and there are going to be more after us. So I think it's within everybody's interest, at least I think that's our position, to possibly come up with some way of collaborating and some way of creating standard policies, best use practices, and I think it would be good for the whole registration system.
Are there any processes underway that you'd mention that we should be getting involved with?
I'm not going to take a bunny out of a hat here. No, none that I know of. Let me throw some more. Do we need some kind of federation of the registries? Some kind of way that we can do this one search box that then goes to all of them, where the registries can auto-discover each other and whatnot? I mean, I'm not saying we should. Is this something is this too early for this? Is it?
Isn't that Google?
Maybe, yeah. Is Google enough?
But Google doesn't really claim. Sorry.
No, go for it. Then we'll get a mic over here. Yeah.
At the moment, anyway, I mean, Google doesn't really do a whole lot of claiming that someone is the owner or someone has licensed has made something available under a certain license. Of course, I guess to Wendy's point, we don't either. We just claim that they made that claim.
So my take is that I think we're missing sort of the other half of the equation, which is the publishing and assembly side. So when we look at the way we consume media right now, it's very networked, right? I go to a web page, I click on things, I get lots of information that quickly comes towards me. But from the published side, it's less networked. I get one thing, I kind of bring it together. It's kind of cut off now from where it originally came from. And it's almost as if we need a revolution in the tool sets to be much more semantically aware to get to a point where it's almost like semantic publishing. So I can bring things together, but they're still tethered to where they came from and can go back there and get the information that they need. Whether that's a registry, whether that's a personal registry, maybe each website has their own registry to say, this is my stuff, here's how I want it, viewed and used. And then there are, aggregators, which are people who then take that information and offer it up in a broader context and an ecosystem that's more focused for people who want to look for specific things. And they can go into that context, like a music context or a genre in a music context, to get that information and then bring it in. But my point is basically that the registry is one half of the equation, but then it's the consumption side, not so much the consumption side, but the production side, the publishing side that needs to be enabled as well.
So you want to semantically enable the publishers a little bit more so that they can be more connected.
Yeah, I mean, I love our tools to be that way.
Yeah. Using Adobe tools, of course. Yeah. Any other thoughts on collaborative technology efforts? Luis, I think you want to say something. Like maybe you want to say we don't need any of this.
No. No. I mean, standards are good. Collaboration is good. I think there's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, and I wish I knew how to address that. But it seems like people won't create the publishing tools until users have something in their hands that are going to make the publishing tools interesting, right? And nobody's going to write those user side tools until the publisher side tools are there. And I mean, maybe that's an interesting question for this group to tackle. I don't have a good suggestion on that chicken and egg problem, but it seems like, is there anybody from Firefox here?
Well, I
that
just
wants
want
to talk about that?
Songbird is that, right? Isn't that what we saw with that?
Yeah. I mean, Songbird is part of it for one specific type of content. I don't know if there's a generalized solution or not. I'm just a lawyer.
No. You can't say that.
Well, I'm not a lawyer yet, but soon enough.
Yeah, back on a process that we're working on. I was talking to, I believe it was Mike from Creative Commons, about the DMP. I don't know if anybody's aware of the Digital Media Project, but they've set up a proposed list of procedural and operational responsibilities for registration authorities and agencies, and it might be a good starting point for the steps that need to be performed for setting up and running content registries. For an example, in the music industry, there's something that's being used as the global release identifier. The grid scheme has been established by rights collecting societies, and Registered Commons has adopted this same grid identifier scheme, consisting of 18 characters, issuer code element, release number element, check character element, identifier scheme element, and we've adopted this kind of model to allow other registries to use it as well. And so instead of the grid, it's basically an RC identification element, whereas another registry could come along through exchanging API query with other registries, and they could also attach this grid element as well. Again, I'm not as technically versed in what's going on, but
So this is mostly for identifying or for giving an identifier to individual works.
Right.
So
Yeah,
some
and
standards are emerging there.
some standards and other registries could also use the system that we've put in place that is based on the DMP process as well.
Okay. So one thing I want to get back to from the previous panel that we had is that Mike laid out this nice partition of the types of registries. Some of them are pure registries, meaning you actually do a job of getting people to enter their data and you timestamp it and you sign it and whatnot. And then there are these sort of opportunistic registries like Flickr. Is Flickr a registry? Right? I mean, they have content. They don't advertise themselves as a registry. Are they a registry by accident? Should we get them to adopt one of these registry standards? Yeah. You don't think? Here.
I think registry is a system that can certificate content.
Okay, so there's a level of
save.
So trust is inherent, like a level of trust in the statement is inherent for a registry. What if they started making these stronger? Sorry, yeah.
Sure. I know we're sort of thinking copyright 2.0, but in the current state of affairs, at least in the U.S., registering with the U.S. Copyright Office does buy you something. So there's the legal piece to that you need to sort of weigh in, and how you take that responsibility that is legally recognized out with the U.S. Copyright Office and move it to other registries is something to be thought about.
So for a lot of people in the audience who have a vague idea that after 1976 registering doesn't matter, what do you gain from actually registering?
It has to do with eligibility for statutory damages. And I am not personally a lawyer and couldn't get into the integral details, but there is a legal benefit to registering with the U.S. Copyright Office.
So are any of the registries, are you guys thinking of helping people register with the local copyright, your country's copyright office? If they register with you, is that a way to register with a copyright office too?
No. Well, copyright offices have their own system, and it's not. but it's more simple. In Spain, copyright registry is very, very simple, so it doesn't allow many features that
Sure. You have more features, but if I register with you, do you help your users register with, copyright 1.0 also?
No difference. No difference. In Spain, we don't have this. It's not compulsory to register, and when you have no advantages legally, but of course, in the practice, yes.
Yeah, I see. Sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, just wanted to follow up on what I think is an important point about the difference between the sort of U.S. government copyright registry and other kinds of registries that we might build, that it both sort of gives rights to the copyright holder. And before you can file a copyright lawsuit, you need to have registered your copyright, as well as giving you the eligibility for statutory damages. And it gives rights to the general public that if they see a registration with the Copyright Office, they know that's reliable and they would be protected in relying on that, even if somebody had made a wrongly founded claim to the Copyright Office. They would get the kind of safe harbor that we were talking about earlier for innocently relying on somebody's false statements to the Copyright Office. A registry that we can construct couldn't offer those things. So what it can offer is a chain of things that people are willing to say about content, and some of those things might be useful and reliable, and some of them might not be. So we need to, as we're thinking about constructing those registries, leave in enough metadata so that people can figure out what's the useful data that's been put in there and how much do they want to rely on any piece of it.
Follow up. That's kind of a big blind spot here, which is the government copyright registry. To what extent has there been any involvement between CC and the Copyright Office in the U.S. or in other countries? And to what extent, if we're talking about collaboration, should this be a collaboration between government and non-governmental organizations?
One of the questions on the table is what does need to be done, and potentially what might need to be done by CC, although we only have so much power, right? But I want to get back briefly because I thought I touched a nerve there for a second on whether Flickr should be a registry, and by that we talked about registry as having the issue of statutory damages, but as Wendy just mentioned, it's also the fact that if you're on Flickr, then you might have a license associated with your content, and it would be nice if that protected you as a content creator from other folks misusing your content. Do we need to find ways to use existing Web 2.0 user-generated content repositories and to bring them into whatever Registry 2.0 architecture we're talking about? Or do we have to have a model where, no, you go to an official registry company?
I think that there are two applications that people are going to try to build using registries. So there are two applications people are going to try to build using registries. One is they're going to want to know what are all the Creative Commons works that might be applicable to this purpose. And they're going to want to know, given this work, is it a Creative Commons work? And in both those contexts, they're going to have the assumption that when they get that list back, it's going to apply to them as a player. It's going to understand their own non-commercial status, whether or not they're actually non-commercial, and that this technology will be able to make that judgment. So, so the question of how somebody like Flickr fits into that, I would say that there needs to be a specific program, a piece of software that tells me what all the Creative Commons works are in this field, and in any given thing, and Flickr is going to have to be in that pool, and probably if Flickr isn't in that pool, it doesn't work. And then the other question is this a Creative Commons work? And I imagine if you didn't look in Flickr for a JPEG to see if it was already in Flickr and had a license, then again, you'd be leaving a big hole. So what do you think? You looked like you were going to say something.
You just raised a very interesting point, which is that the role of the registry then is not in Registry 1.0. We're trying to protect the original author's rights, and if you look there, it's to and you find something, your conclusion is going to be, I can't do this. I can't use this work. Whereas in Registry 2.0, you might be using it to find works you can reuse, which maybe this is obvious, but it sounds interesting. This is a new purpose for a registry, right? You're trying to find work to reuse.
I think that's a primary value of Creative Commons. But I also think it's very hard. I mean, going back to the woman who mentioned the difficulty in understanding the licensing status of something that users had uploaded. I mean, I think that there's no practical way for somebody to start a new photo uploading site and evaluate the copyright status of everything that comes up.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Robert Cook from Freebase. I was just trying to put all these things together, and it's been brought up a few times that Flickr or Music Brains, it seems like aggregating metadata together, and if you view license as a kind of metadata, it's a way of promoting your content. So in a way, if you say, this song is on this album by this artist, and you're the artist, and you apply the license at the same time, it's sort of one-stop shopping. And if you think of license as a way of being found, if you have an open license, then publishing all that metadata at once in one place is actually a good thing. It makes you findable. And I think that's why Flickr's been so successful in a lot of ways, is that it's just one-stop shopping. You not only publish the metadata, but the content as well. And then you have tags, which allow your content to be found. And if you think about the CC license you're using, it's just another way to be found. So I think that's, instead of thinking of registries as sort of a horizontal layer across all different kinds of content, it might be better to think of it as something that's industry or sort of media or content specific.
Yeah, so going back to the visibility issue that was mentioned earlier, the registry as a way to gain visibility and potentially to do it in a vertical specific way. All right, I'm going to transition to the next question, which is obviously quite important. In this stuff we talked about, in all these registries that are being built, what role should we Creative Commons, absolutely not play? Or not, maybe not absolutely, just what role would you prefer we not play? Do I need to throw out some straw man to, All right, let's start. Oh, good, yeah.
So the issue of non-commercial licensing is a huge topic in the community of people who are doing work related to Creative Commons, and I've got to say that it would be good if Creative Commons helped to calm these fires. In particular, I got to say Creative Commons is still advocating non-commercial licensing as if there was consensus within the community that this was the right thing. And so it would help if Creative Commons would, bring some clarity to this issue and help the community to resolve what should the right practice be.
Are you implying that we're telling people to do the wrong thing with a non-commercial?
Well, I'm implying that that may be true.
So these are things that Creative Commons should stop doing, not things we should. Okay.
I'd like to throw into that the whole license scheme with the Creative Commons has helped me a lot, helped me build a nonprofit business model that works rather well. And I think in a lot of respects, the Creative Commons isn't emphasizing the commercial aspect of it enough. I think CC Plus is a good start for that, for actually saying, hey, there is a way for a transition from Creative Commons content to non-Creative Commons content that's fully paid or what have you. I think there's a lot of people, especially when I go to conferences such as the Future of Music conference, and there's a lot of FUD that's being spewed about with regards to Creative Commons licenses, and I hear people on panels, and then somebody in the audience says, hey, Creative Commons, is that a good idea? And the people on the panel are just talking essentially a lot of shit, in my opinion, about it. And I go speak up and try and set them straight. What people aren't seeing is that When you put out a piece of content, it's an irrevocable license, and they kind of feel like they're signing away their entire life, their entire creative, everything they're ever going to put out, because they have sort of a bad feeling about copyright, about contracts with the recording industry. So, but I think the Creative Commons, and that's obviously not exactly what the Commons should not do, but I think the Commons ought to emphasize a little bit more that there is a transition to a commercial licensing model, because there is money to be made. And I think the Creative Commons is a great way for people to get their content out there and then transition from that model into something where a little bit more money is flowing in their pocket. And I think that's not a wrong thing.
So we should encourage the kind of business model you've found, which is to say you can do Creative Commons and commercial stuff. There's plenty of compatible stuff, of compatible ideas there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If I may combine the comments that Lucas made and the gentleman from Music Brains, we can easily actually solve the whole non-commercial aspects by saying we're only having the licenses without the whole non-commercial issue. And if you want to make sure that you can use it commercially, then we're going to use the CC Plus licenses. So basically, CC could encourage the whole either share the content or contact the creator and try to negotiate for the CC Plus options. Then you would have not so much issues anymore with the non-commercial versus commercial definition, which is like a big issue.
Okay, can you? Yeah, Joey is mentioning that CC Plus isn't actually a license; it's a combination of a license plus potentially some additional.
I know.
Okay. Okay.
It's just that I think if you remove the option of commercial or the non-commercial option, which is a definition issue, which has been a definition issue since the beginning of the CC licenses, and I know you can use it as a strategic advantage as well. I mean, because there is not a consensus about the definition. But in order to strengthen the commercial aspects of the CC licenses, you could say remove the non-commercial option, and instead of that, promote the CC Plus extra options.
Yeah. Why don't you?
You want to ask the question?
Well, I have a quick question. Would that? Do you mean that you would have a baseline of a non-commercial license, but with CC Plus to define the commercial terms, or a baseline of an attribution license? Is that along the lines of-
Not really.
Okay,
Well,
Joey,
let
what-
me just define CC Plus, just so, and Mike, you can correct me when I'm wrong. But CC Plus just means a framework for a second license, or more than licenses other than the CC license that would apply when the CC license doesn't apply. So it's most commonly used in conjunction with the non-commercial license, because a non-commercial license just says, here are the things you can do in non-commercial, but we're not going to say anything about the commercial use. And so the CC Plus lets you say, and here's the license for the commercial use. So I don't really know what would be how could you remove the non-commercial and also, but then use the plus? I guess I'm confused.
Okay.
Can you answer?
What I try to explain, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it as well, is that as far as I understood, non-commercial is not being defined. There's not a consensus definition of what is commercial, what is not commercial. For instance, if I take a very concrete example, in the Netherlands you have the public broadcasters who get a lot of money from the government. Still, they're public broadcasters. Are these profitable businesses? Are these commercial entities, or are they non-commercial entities because they provide a public service? It's really hard to define that definition for organizations like that, these kind of entities. But if you say there is no such option as commercial or non-commercial, you just have like the GPL. You have either you share the material under an attribution share alike license, or if you don't want to share, you just go and negotiate a new license under the CC Plus options. I think that would be a good solution.
Okay, Mike, I think you want to provide some clarification, right?
Sure. And if I have a brainstorm while I'm talking, I'll tie it back to registries, but I don't promise anything. So actually, going back to what Lucas said, I think he's really talking about two different debates. And one is what does non-commercial mean? If you license something under a non-commercial license, what uses are you actually prohibiting and permitting? And then the other debate is, should people be using non-commercial licenses at all? And I guess Bjorn also touched on both of those things. And we realize both of those are contentious. On the first, what does non-commercial mean? It's an ongoing conversation. We put out draft guidelines that were just discussion draft guidelines a couple of years ago, and we'll be doing some academic studies on what people's expectations are coming up. But personally, I think people focus on this issue way too much. If you as a user want to use content and you think that you might have some reason to be considered a commercial user, there's plenty of content that explicitly allows commercial use. So like stop whining about what non-commercial means and find content that doesn't have that restriction on it. But I'm not a lawyer.
I'm not sure stop whining is a normal legal term.
So, but on the other point, we've been careful over the past year to draw some distinctions between licenses that are open source like, and that they meet some definitions of freedom. You can look at freedomdefined.org for one of those. So with some branding that sort of delineates between those that are clearly sharing licenses or commons licenses, whatever you want to call them, and those that have restrictions that those people don't consider to be truly contributing to the commons, or so that would be the non-commercial and no derivatives restrictions. But and so on this, just to be clear, there are two totally separable debates there, and you don't have to be involved in the debate. Just use whatever works, whatever actually works for you. And on the CC plus point, it is very easy to think of the use case being there's something under a non-commercial license, and I'm at the same time going to offer some private license that allows me to make a commercial use. However, there are a lot of other use cases. For example, something could be under just an attribution license, but the service you're offering is use it without, or you're offering a private license that would allow use without attribution or offer some kind of indemnification, although it sounded like people weren't interested in offering that. Share alike is another. If you have something that's under attribution share alike, so it permits commercial use, people may not want, they might want to make a derivative work and not abide by the share alike. And that's in fact roughly like what a bunch of open source companies do with the GPL. So there's good precedent there, although they don't have something called open source plus. But
so this is
effectively that's what it is.
So this joins back to the point that was made earlier, the idea of doing a share alike. That's what you were saying, right? Share alike license with a CC plus in case you don't want the share alike constraint, basically.
That's right. And I mean, even if, never mind offering the indemnification, a lot of users just need to have a signed agreement, with paper, and that's another use case.
So another comment towards the non-commercial bit and the lack of definition. I actually spoke with Larry about this, and this is actually a good thing. So the way he explained it to me is that the non-commercial part simply means as long as there's no money changing hands, you're okay to use it. As soon as money starts changing hands, you're not okay to use it. However, the people that the copyright holders that are defining the licenses at this point should actually go and actually define what is an okay non-commercial use. So you're talking about, say, the Netherlands broadcaster. That may be kind of a difficult thing to put into perspective of what the Creative Commons is looking at. But I think in this particular case, the Netherlands broadcaster can say, we see this this, and this as acceptable uses that are considered as non-commercial, go, don't bother us with it. Everybody else needs to come talk to us. And that's largely the basis that MusicBrainz is doing it with as well. There's certain things where you're free to go ahead and use it, otherwise you need to come talk to us. So this uncertainty doesn't need to necessarily be a negative thing. You can actually put a little definition that fits your context into place that actually then takes some of that uncertainty out because you're in control of defining what's going on. So I view it as a positive, not as a negative.
All right, so I take away one important lesson, which is that we still need to think about how to explain at least the non-commercial commercial line, since that has raised a number of questions. We're technically at the end of our time. What I'd like to do is pop up for a second and say if there are any general thoughts, closing comments, things you really wanted to get in. We can probably take one or two more questions, but we do need to wrap up about registries, Creative Commons. I didn't even have to throw any straw men, but is there anything more you'd like us to do specifically in the registry direction? And if not, we can also wrap it up. All right, I won't push then. Thanks, everyone.